Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we mark today, day 501 since the atrocities committed by the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates on October 7th of 2023, right now we have a number of updates, particularly also about the hostages. And for that, let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you update us on the latest?
Yes, Jonathan. So it's a big news day in Israel regarding the hostages, because originally, according to the ceasefire agreement, the Hamas commitment was to release 3 hostages who are alive, and then next week another 3, and following that 8 bodies of Israelis. It has all been rushed now. Day after tomorrow, on Thursday, 4 bodies will be returned to Israel. These are all Israeli civilians or perhaps soldiers who were abducted and then either killed or murdered. Sometimes bodies were already abducted after having been killed on the Israeli side of the border. And 2 days later, on Saturday, the remaining 6 Israeli hostages who are alive, remaining under this part of the deal, are going to be released. 2 of the 6 have been held for more than a decade by Hamas. They were not abducted on October the 7th. They are an Israeli of Ethiopian extraction, Avera Mengistu, and an Israeli Bedouin, Hashem Asayed. And following that, there will still be 4 bodies to be returned sometime next week. What that means is that Hamas wants to rush the succession, the sequence of the 2 parts of the deal. Presidential emissary Steve Witkoff, who was in Saudi Arabia today with Secretary of State Rubio for talks with the Russians, and will take part in the other talks with Russia on Ukraine, has announced that Israel will go into stage 2, regardless of what we hear from Jerusalem. There will still be 24 or so Israeli live hostages, plus bodies to be returned. But it seems as if Hamas is fulfilling its part of the deal. In other news, we'll talk about the Lebanese border a bit later.
Indeed. Well, with this, of course, in mind, talking about the Gaza Strip, just a couple hours ago, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar made a couple of statements to the Foreign Press Corps here in Jerusalem, during the course of which he did highlight that the talks for Stage 2, or Phase 2, as it's outlined in the document, are reinvigorated. So there are discussions about it, and they're talking about it quite vigorously. Nevertheless, time will tell. The Islamist Hamas is still, to keep in context, a terrorist organization.
Time will tell, and TV7 will also.
And TV7 will tell about what occurs in that time, indeed. But with that, let's now turn to Colonel in Reserve, Reuven Ben Shalom, a cross-cultural strategist, a fighter pilot or a pilot, as well as a long list of other things, including a fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University. It's good to see you, Colonel. The last time you were with us was roughly 500 days ago, so it's been a while since you were able to return now, and we're glad to have you with us. I'd like to hear your take on the situation in the Gaza Strip. Obviously, Hamas is known as a organization that breaches agreements. Let's put it quite clearly on the table. How can Israel maneuver within that context, and to what degree are the assurances granted by the Americans as well as by the Qataris and Egyptians sufficient for Israel to persist?
Well, first, thank you for having me back. It's interesting because also throughout this war, sometimes when people argue Hamas said this, Hamas claimed that, So I say that a terror organization that can behead babies can also lie. So the fact that they will lie or cheat or use propaganda or go back on their agreements, that means nothing. Remember that they have a long game, and that long game, of course, is to eliminate Israel. So they're not going to stop tomorrow. They're not going to be tempted by better life somewhere else. That also goes to other ideas that are being floated now. And the way they're calculating themselves is, of course, to negotiate with us and look at tomorrow, look at next week, but also look 10 years into the future. Probably Hamas understand our determination to change the mindset from the past that we are no longer going to go back to containing after this round. Our rhetoric is very clear. The United States is very clear that Hamas cannot rule the Gaza Strip. So I hope they listen to this and understand that we really mean this. And perhaps this also puts more pressure on them this time, understanding that we mean business. Sometimes in Israel, the discourse goes to maybe some shallow understanding, maybe political understanding of does Bibi want this or does Bibi want that? Are we going back to war or not? So I will say the question of going back to war is not if during this weekend or next week we're going to go back to high intensity fighting, but understanding that the war isn't over. I mean, that nobody can argue. It doesn't matter if you're right or left in Israel. The war isn't over because we didn't fulfill the objectives, and that is to remove Hamas from power, militarily and governmentally. So that's the bigger picture. Down to what's happening these days, I think you can see the pressure that Hamas is under. And when I say pressure, also from the mediators, they listen very carefully to what they say, and that's Egypt and Qatar and the United States, as do we. And you can see how the players now are calculating themselves. It's not to say that if we go through this phase one, phase two, and I hope we do, by the way, I think it's the right thing to do. But after that, it's not like, okay, so that is finally the hostages are back, so the war is over. It still really means nothing in the overall strategic picture.
Indeed. Well, let's shift gears to Lebanon. For that, we have Brigadier General in Reserve Reddick Shafir, formerly an Israel Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to initially state happy birthday. I will not specify when or in what age you've reached, since that is public information on the internet, and I'll let our viewers do that for themselves. But nonetheless, take this opportunity to also highlight that you've been with us also here from the start, and therefore within the time span from October 8th to now, General Shafir, the Iranian proxy Hezbollah has been very adamant in its modus operandi, but now it seems that it's becoming less and less relevant as time progresses. The Lebanese government is taking over in many of the positions, but the in Hebrew we say chovat ha'ochacha. They need to prove themselves in the field to be able to truly show that they are capable and determined to enforce the outline of the ceasefire arrangement. Do you see that happening, and what can you tell us about Lebanon currently within the process of disengagement that the IDF is currently conducting?
The truce between Israel and Hezbollah or Lebanon is not stable. The reason is that Hezbollah can have its forces come down to the southern part of Lebanon, very close to the Israeli border, and pose a threat. They can also smuggle in munitions, even missiles, and the inhabitants of the north will probably not feel safe enough to go back home, even though the military will upgrade its presence along the lines. So what we've seen in the last few days are more attacks by the IDF on Hezbollah strongholds and munition depots in the Bekaa Valley and along the Syrian-Lebanese border, where they have some tunnels where they smuggle weapons from Syria. We're also seeing attacks in Tyre on a Hamas leader there, hinting that these attacks will not stop and will continue to harass Hezbollah until we get a stable solution. A stable solution is probably not just the Lebanese army making sure that Hezbollah warriors do not get close to the border, but have some stronger forces along the line enforcing that. We have to remember that the Lebanese military consists of Hezbollah people who serve both sides meaning the Lebanese army and Hezbollah, and therefore it's not dependable as far as the safety of the North is concerned. So we entered this ceasefire thinking that we don't have enough leverage over Hezbollah, and it is that way until now. And I envision that, except for the 5 posts that will be held by the IDF overlooking major areas close to the border, we'll also see continuous attacks on Hezbollah. Either Lebanon will take hold of them in one way or another, put them under pressure. We're seeing this happening. And the IDF will not stop this until some stable solution, either through Lebanese determination or foreign interference, meaning French or American soldiers, boots on the ground within UNIFIL.
Well, naturally, the French have already proposed that the more potent elements within UNIFIL would take over the 5 positions, but the State of Israel cannot guarantee that UNIFIL, which has been lacking, and that's an understatement, since the implementation of 1701, the United Nations Security Council post the war of 2006 in Lebanon, you can't really accept such a reality, or where is the gray zone, so to speak, in that context?
So first, because you referred to Relic Shafir's birthday, let me comment that whatever his age is, he doesn't look it. And I was wondering, because he flew F-15s and F-16s, whether it's the oxygen or the G-forces, and if there are recommendations for us mortals, perhaps after the show, he may send them on a private basis. Now, regarding your question, there are 3 lines of effort that Israel wants to pursue in Lebanon: deployment, build-up, and political participation. All of that, Hezbollah's, not Israel. Israel would not let the ground forces of Hezbollah, especially the commando unit Radwan, get any closer to the border and therefore to the Israeli communities than they are now, preferably north of the Litani. Build up, Israel will not let Hezbollah get its arsenal back to where it was before the war, and will not let munitions be transshipped either through Syria or via air directly from Iran. And as for the political effort, this is being conducted in the Lebanese parliament, in Lebanese politics. Always in Lebanon, there are forces behind the scenes, pulling and pushing, incentives, pressures. Hopefully, Hezbollah will never get back to where it was. Now, as for the 5 posts, Israel needs surveillance, and once the surveillance comes up with suspicious movements, it has to shoot at them. It can be separated. Surveillance can be from the air or from inside Israel, from the high ground. But it must have some trigger pullers anywhere, so that if Hezbollah dares get closer, it could shoot. Military professionals can arrange it.
Indeed. Well, even though I know Colonel Ben Shalom has plenty to say about Lebanon, I'd like to shift gears to Syria, where we're seeing continued deployment of IDF forces in the Golan region. Also, we're seeing the various activities of Damascus to try and consolidate power over Syrian territories which are not under its sway, which, quite frankly, is the majority of the country. But coming down to troop counts, I mean, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is one of the smallest and weakest militias in Syria. The backing, at least from this organization by Turkey, is the only thing that keeps it alive, including the fact that we're seeing the Jesh al-Watani, which is the national army, as they call it, which is practically a Turkish proxy. They can't really do everything unless the United States comes to terms with a certain proposal by Ankara, or in cooperation and coordination also with the State of Israel, Saudi Arabia for that matter, which has also some sway over Damascus and Syria at large. But how do you see all of that play out from Israel's national security interests at present?
Well, Syria for many years has been like this playground of the powers and regional and international powers. And sometimes it was strange to see, American troops on the ground there, and the Russian presence, a lot of deconfliction, even between rivals. And then when the regime toppled, it was like the world wanted to see this nice picture of, oh, finally, freedom. It's even like going back to 2011, when something begins to unfold that looks positive or looks like a positive trend, still you're in the midst of the chaos, and it means nothing as far as what's going to happen later on. You also see official Israel trying to radiate optimism, talk in positive terminology. We wish to see there a regime that will live as good neighbors side by side with Israel. But still, we understand that it's a no man's land, which was one of the reasons why we had to take out all the weapons. I think it was a mistake to brag about it so much, but still, we had to take out a lot of munitions and equipment so they don't fall into the wrong hands, because we don't even know who those hands are. As you pointed out, Turkey, of course, that has interests here. And now that the playground has been reshuffled, they are looking to reestablish themselves. Iran, and as I said before, in Gaza, the long-term strategic interests of Iran and its proxies have not changed. So we certainly think that we contributed or had something to do with the way the Assad regime toppled, and the whole Iranian axis has been brought to its knees in a way as far as the concept. But still now Syria for them is a new playground to reestablish themselves. And I think for us, our interest then is to be very careful, especially after October 7th. I think Israel's national security, even without writing it, even without declaring it, in a way changed. We're not going to take risks. We can't say it's going to be okay, this is now contained, but we are going to have all the means at our disposal to make sure that we know what's happening. And also doing things under the radar, because as I said before, if we want good neighbors on the other side, we should start acting towards them as the good neighbors that they hope they will be. So a lot of things can also happen under the radar. Remember the sensitivity of the Druze community and the Druze in Israel that we would want to see here also, finally, a historic situation where the Druze people can live in peace and quiet here and on the other side. So there's still a lot to be seen. I think we can be optimistic, because when you look at the players now, especially the president or the self-elected president of Syria, understands this game. You can see the terminology that he uses, even the name change of himself, understanding the international powers. I think that what he sees is that if he plays it right, he will get support, he will get funding, he will be able to build. Can we trust this and understand that it's all going to be positive? Absolutely not. Because he himself and his organization has already shifted titles, shifted agendas. So who knows what's going to happen? We have to be very vigilant, very careful. Bottom line, just a point about our boots on the ground, that means nothing. So even if you hear criticism or some concern, we have no territorial aspirations. We don't plan to stay there. Hopefully it's going to be the border as we know it. It's just going to be a peaceful border with good neighbors. And hopefully sooner more than later, we will be able to pull out of there and be realigned back on the border.
Jonathan, let me interject for a moment, because Reuven mentioned the Druze community on both sides of the border. When the history of this war will be written, it will be noted that the tragedy that took place in a Druze community, Majd al-Shams, was the trigger for the events of Israel decimating Hezbollah, the entire leadership, and in short order, the THS dared starting its campaign, which toppled Assad. So it's the law of unintended consequences. One projectile, which tragically killed 12 Druze youth in a community.
And wounded 39 other children.
Indeed,
I think it's important to highlight.
which compelled Israel to respond, not in kind, but against leaders of Hezbollah, one by one. Then we got to December. This all took place in September, October, November. In December, the march on Damascus, and here we are today.
Indeed. Well, interestingly enough, yesterday when I was in a certain event with senators and congressmen and different people of note that was also organized here in Israel by the Hudson Institute, among others, a very influential individual came up to me and actually said, thank you to the Druze community for everything that they're doing. And unfortunately, this tragedy, as you mentioned, was a very significant part. Something I don't think many people know at home, that I am also a member of that community. So despite being Christian, I'm also by blood Druze and have a stake in that community also as an advisor to the leadership there. But nonetheless, there is much more that needs to be done in order to establish the right parameters that align with the national security interests of the State of Israel, first and foremost, and also to put in line with that the Druze community, both in Israel, Syria, and Lebanon, for that matter, and Jordan. But we won't go that far right now. General Shafir, I'd like to ask you, since the Iranians have come out and leveled a couple of threats that they intend to bring about yet another promise of various projectiles to be launched from the Islamic Republic, potentially, towards the State of Israel, conducting plenty of maneuvers. What can you tell us about that? Should we take them seriously?
No, I don't think so. Let me bring up a proverb that I've learned from my brother, who's specialized in Middle East, that I'm against my brother, me and my brother are against our cousin, and me and my cousin against the rest of the world. So when you create alliances, there's also an old saying that we know that my enemy's enemy is my friend. So at this time, the Iranians are bracing themselves against the sanctions from the U.S. And if they don't come forward with some ideas about their nuclear program, they might risk either the United States will cooperate with Israel on attacks on their nuclear sites, or take it by themselves. And obviously, the U.S. Air Force, which is more of the Strategic Air Command rather than the Air Force, with B-1s and B-2, can actually take out the whole nuclear program. So their choices are between bad and worse. None of them really include a provocation by attacking Israel. Netanyahu, or maybe it's in Israel's interest to have the Iranians agitate in such a manner that we'd be compelled to attack, or the U.S. But at this juncture, I think they are looking for ways out of their dire situation, economic, strategic situation. So the threats about an attack and so on carry no weight behind them and no logic. And the Iranians have their own logic. Once you figure that out, you can actually read what they mean.
Well, Mr. Oren, October is not too far away, half a year from now, and the sanctions that may be reimposed, the snapback mechanism that was established as a safeguard in the event that the Iranians would try to break out, has yet to be used by any of the European powers, namely Britain, Germany, and France. We don't have very much time left. What can you tell us about that?
Well, you say that it's not too long away, but a British prime minister once said that a week is forever in politics. So much can happen. And you know, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, came up with a series of tweets which were very defensive. He said that the accuracy of Iran's ballistic missiles was good, used to be good. The developers were fine, but now it turns out that there's a lot of work to be done, which means now is not the time to get into a military confrontation with either the US or Israel. Now, it may be a deceptive move, but I'm more concerned when they don't threaten, when they are silent and work clandestinely, than when they are bragging about what they can do to us.
Well, they are afraid. Naturally, they're not oblivious.
Regime survival is the word.
Exactly. It's regime survival. They understand that the power disparity is significantly more than what it used to be. And ultimately, the implications that we're talking about of potentially going after their nuclear infrastructure may bring about the much aspired by many, the downfall of the Ayatollah regime.
But what they say is, let them, namely us, destroy, we will rebuild.
Indeed. Well, wishful thinking at that. This is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Colonel Ben Shalom and General Shafir, Mr. Oren, of course, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at TV7israelnews.com.